Welcome to the Private Practice Survival Guide podcast with your host, Brandon Seigel. I'm a published author, speaker, entrepreneur, and private practice strategist dedicated to transforming the way that healthcare functions. This podcast is all about empowering you to create the change you want to see. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Private Practice Survival Guide podcast. In this episode, we're talking about budgeting for your bottom line. Now, I want to talk about strategies for your budget planning approach. A lot of you don't recognize that a budget is a direction, and that direction can correlate to what we're trying to accomplish. And it also becomes a measurement tool for us to identify our forecasting, our projections, and all the different ways that we measure function in our growth output as a practice. And so as we're looking at things, one of the things that I often find is really crucial is to differentiate forecasting and projections. So forecasting, what we're doing is we're predicting likely outcomes based on data. So that idea of, hey, we've accomplished this much, and based on that, this is what we're forecasting. Operational planning and budgeting is a great way to forecast. What we're doing is we're taking historical data and trends. We're looking at a time of short to medium months to 1 year. It's a higher data-driven approach for accuracy. It's a little bit less flexible because it's tied to the current trends. We're really on a forecast looking at, based on everything that is historic, this is what could be. And a use case for it is typically I'll use it for like managing cash flow, setting budgets. So every time I hire an employee, I can forecast how long it takes for them to cover their costs, as an example. So we average 3 months for them to flip the script between their initial overhead and the revenue correlated in a cash flow basis. That all is an example of forecasting. When we shift to projections, now what we're looking at is we're estimating outcomes based on hypotheticals. So if I were to hire 5 more employees in 2025, this is what I forecast the revenue to be. It's strategic planning. It's scenario analysis. It's assumptions. It's hypothetical scenarios. Typically, I'm using this long-term. This is my 3 to 5 year plan. So it's a little bit lower accuracy. It's a little bit more speculative. It's highly flexible. There can be multiple scenarios. So even the idea of using it for planning expansion, pitching to investors, hey, when I am asking for money, I'm going to use projections. So I got a business plan. Here's the deal. This is what we're currently forecasted at. These are our projections. You give me $500,000. We're going to open 1 location every other year with that $500,000 investment based on the following. And this is what we forecast each location being able to deliver based on prior actions and whatnot. And so just building that projection overall of the investment might be one example of how I use it. And so forecasting, just as kind of an example, is a chiropractic practice uses last year's patient visit data and seasonal trends to forecast $15,000 in monthly revenue for the next quarter. They're just showing, based on trends, this is where we're going to be. It helps them plan for staff hours, supply orders. It allows them to have more consistency of what's coming down the pike. Now, projections, that same practice projects $500,000 in annual revenue in 5 years if it opens a second location, doubles its marketing budget, assuming a 20% increase in patient volume. That would be a projection based on hypothetical circumstances. So we're utilizing forecasting and projections in a lot of different ways. And I think it's just crucial that you recognize they go hand in hand. We utilize them for short-term and long-term planning, depending on what we're trying to accomplish. When we're building a budget planning strategy, the first thing I want you to look at is I want you to understand your revenue streams. I want you to know where that revenue is coming from. Analyze the income sources. So identify all the revenue streams, such as client fees, insurance reimbursements. Do you have subscription-based services? Do you have products? there are medical practices that may rely just on patient copays and insurance payments, elective procedures, all those different things. I want you to analyze that income source. The next thing I want you to do under understanding revenue stream is I want you to forecast your revenue. I want you to utilize historical data to predict future income. Account for seasonal trends, flu season for medical practices or tax. So there's a world where I'm looking at a quarter over quarter, meaning fourth quarter over fourth quarter. What do I forecast based on last fourth quarter? But then taking into our trailing quarters of first, second, third. So if we're seeing more, it could be just as an example. Last fourth quarter was a 20% reduction of third, second, first. So if we look at first, second, third, where that trend is and reduce that by 20%, we now have a better forecast of where our fourth quarter should be in this upcoming year. The next thing on our budget planning strategy, we've figured out our revenue forecasts. We now need to categorize and prioritize our expenses. We need to look at our fixed costs first and foremost. What are examples of fixed costs? That's rent, utilities, sometimes it's salaries, sometimes it's software subscriptions. These are all non-negotiable, and should be budgeted first, meaning like no matter what, I signed a contract, these are fixed expenses that I've already agreed upon. Once we look at our fixed expenses, we want to look at our variable expenses. Our variable expenses, they're going to account for supplies, marketing, continuing education, things that can change. Even things like payroll. Payroll can go up and down based on how many employees I have. That could be a variable expense. Maybe I pay my employees variable. They get paid more based on the production they do. These are all things that could be variable costs to look at. Capital expenditures is the next thing. Plan for large investments like equipment upgrades, office renovations. Make sure you're setting aside in your budget planning what those funds need and what that financial strain may be. The next thing I always look for is an emergency fund. I like to allocate 6 months. Some will tell you 3 months, but 3 to 6 months of operating expense to cover unexpected events such as equipment failure, economic downturns, emergencies. In Florida, we had huge hurricanes this last year in 2024, brutal. And so you need a budget for that. 3, implement zero-based budgeting. So when we're looking at zero-based budgeting, we're starting from zero. Justify every expense for each budget cycle rather than carrying over the previous budget. Now, I can look at the past year's budget, but I want to start with zero so it ensures funds are allocated purposely, because what we did last year might be different than what we do this year. So I can use it as a drawing board, but still start with zero. Align with your goals. I want you to tie expenses to specific practice goals, such as, hey, we're going to hire new staff. We're going to expand services. We're going to increase a new service. We're going to increase new payer sources. What are all the different ways we're expanding? How do we align that with our goals? Now, it's so crucial in this zero-based budgeting that we review consistently. Regularly, I want you to reassess the budget. So usually I'm doing it on a quarterly basis to adjust for changes. I like a 4-quarter budget. Each quarter is reassessed, reimagined, reevaluated accordingly. And I have an original budget versus a current budget, and so that I can always show that trend. So it's kind of like phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Each variation I want to monitor so I can see how many times I'm adjusting budgets based on changes in the environment. 4, I want you to leverage technology for financial tracking. Utilizing accounting software, tools like QuickBooks, Xero, FreshBooks to track income and expenses in real time. Optimize your approach, whether it be AI, coaching. I'm representing today, whether you know it or not, Accounted For, company that gave me this bow tie. Thanks, shout out to Accounted For. Great tool, great resource, and they can be of help to you. Practice management systems for healthcare practices, systems like Epic, Athena Health, integrate billing and financial reporting. Really important. The next thing I want you to think with is automating reporting. Set up dashboards to monitor key performance indicators like your profit margins, overhead costs, account receivables. Have that automatic data, boom, populating. Control your overhead costs. So we got to negotiate contracts, our vendor relationships, our review period, regularly reviewing what makes sense, what doesn't, securing better rates when possible. Outsource non-core tasks. So I'm going to be very transparent. I think outsourcing is a byproduct of the quality you get for the money. So there are times where it's very rare when you outsource to me that it's going to be financially cheaper than you having full-time workforce. But what I will say is that I am able to deliver often a higher quality results oriented focus because I'm able to budget for more for that role than you are based on the way that my employees leverage different function to different organizations. So when you're looking at it, you got to outsource when it makes sense, but it is a measurement of ROI. What is the qualitative outcome? So I had a group that we were servicing, and they brought billing in house. And what they recognized was that although they saved in expense, their income went down so dramatically that they hired us back up. They're like, our team's not able to generate the same revenue. Now, they didn't see it in the first 3 months. They saw it after 9 months because it took time to see the byproduct of their team. My team's results carried on for about 3 to 4 months past our departure, just because of the way that things were set up, payer rules and whatnot. But as the adaptation to changing things happened, they started to recognize their team was not able to make the decisions in payer rules and changes, modifiers and coding that our team is able to catch because their team just didn't have that same strength-based ability. And so understanding how you outsource billing, IT, janitorial services, you could reduce either in-house costs or the ratio, because in this case, our revenue to expense ratio was better than the revenue to ratio expense for their in-house team. We need to optimize staffing. We need to analyze our staff schedules to make sure we're not overstaffing during low demand areas, and understanding the way that we budget overhead. So I tell this to like pediatric therapy clinics all the time. There's a world where I'm better off with a 32-hour full-time role working, 5 days a week in the afternoon than a 40-hour a week. So imagine if I could tell my therapist, you could make the same as a 40-hour work employee if you work 5, call it 6-hour days in the afternoon, evening. There's sometimes ways where actually less hours is more valuable in prime time spots. So optimizing that into your budget planning is really important. We got to plan for taxes. We need to plan for compliance. We need to set aside tax funds. I like to allocate a percentage of revenue. Typically, I'm going with 30% of revenue to a separate account for quarterly and annual tax payments until my CPA tells me otherwise. We have a target every year for what that looks like. Now, some of you are going to be like, well, my goal is to not pay taxes. I'm like, okay, I hope you don't end up in orange and black. That's all I'm going to say. Do what you do, play by the rules, hire the right people, and stay compliant. Budget for licensing fees, budget for malpractice insurance, budget for other regulatory requirements that keep you in business. Consult with tax professionals, work with CPAs that understand our industry. Don't work with the CPA that's trying to get you the lowest tax payment, because often they're playing in grays that might not keep you safe. And so I really am a big believer in understanding the risk tolerance that you have, but also the risk tolerance of those that you take in advisement. So like my CPA and my financial planner both understand I am a low risk to reward ratio when it comes to compliance. I do not want to take risk. I want to be safe. I want to be compliant. I want to be home with my kids every night. I never want to end up concerned for my well-being and safety because there's too much we don't know. So their risks can create liability on you. For the past 20 years, I've had the privilege of helping pediatric occupational, physical, and speech therapists redefine the way that their business functions and helping them tap into their entrepreneurial spirit. In recent years, I recognized a deficit, which was bringing private practice owners together with the vision of allowing them to connect, learn, and grow. And Growth Code Conference was born. From sunrise to sunset, we offer an opportunity for pediatric, occupational, physical, speech therapy private practice leaders and owners to connect, collaborate, learn, grow from yoga to breakfast to lunch to coffee carts and more. We take you to another world where you are inspired, where you feel empowered, and where you are able to grow to the next level so that we all can change the world one child at a time. The next thing you need to do is you need to budget to invest in growth. And that is important. Marketing budget, allocate your funds, whether it's digital, websites, maintenance, community outreach, attract new clients, all of that stuff. Professional development, set aside money for training, certifications, growth, technology upgrades. I want you to budget for tools that improve efficiency, whether it's EHR, client management, you name it, invest in the tools. So I just had this conversation yesterday. Every time a practice comes to me and says, I can't afford it, I say, is it an investment or is it a liability? And what ROI do you need to be able to justify that investment? I want everything I touch to be an investment. I want it to be a great opportunity. I want it to have a planned objective so that I can show that investment. Whether you're spending $10,000 on this or that or whatever it is, it should have a product with an ROI connected to it. We need to monitor and adjust. When we're doing our budgeting, we need to plan monthly reviews, quarterly reviews. We need to compare actual revenue to expenses against the budget, identify those variances. We need to also measure our cash flow. We need to look at what, from a budgeting standpoint, there's accrual base, there's cash bases. I've already talked about it, but I want to ensure sufficient liquidity to cover short-term obligations, especially during slow periods. And then I want to seek feedback. Let's involve our staff. Let's involve our CPAs. Let's involve different people to gain insights into operational needs, cost-saving opportunities, etc. So when you conceptualize your budget template, I want you to break it down into a category, a monthly allocation, and then showing what the actual expense was and notes. So we have a revenue projected of $20,000. We did $28,000 in revenue. Our expense, our notes based on historical data, and understanding all of these categories and building the categories of non-negotiable, negotiable, fixed expense, variable expense, etc. I think that is so important when you're putting together your budget template. And so when we're evaluating our budget, the first thing we want to do, we want to compare actual performance to budgeted figures. We want to gather financial data for the period, monthly, quarterly, compare actual revenue and expenses against that budgeted amount. We want to identify the variances. What are differences between it? Was it salaries, supplies, etc.? We need to analyze that variance, determine the cause. For example, was it a revenue shortfall? Fewer clients, lower reimbursements, seasonal dip, hurricane, whatever that was. We also need to look at, was it overspending, unexpected repairs, increased supply costs, unbudgeted hires? Categorize the variances as favorable or unfavorable. When we're reviewing our key performance indicators, we need to assess the financial metrics that are relevant to your practice. What's our profit margin? What's our overhead ratio? What's our accounts receivable turnover? How quickly payments are collected? Compare KPIs to your industry benchmarks and gauge the efficiency. I've said this, I'm going to say it again. We're going to evaluate not just the accrual-based value of a budget, what we anticipate the budget being, but the cash flow basis. Analyze your cash flow statements to ensure sufficient liquidity. Check for delays in payments. Look at your quick payers, your slow payers. Ensure that your practice can cover all your obligations. Assess your budget assumptions. Looking at reviewing them from, client volume, market conditions, cost estimates. I want you to determine if these assumptions hold true. What is real? What's not real? Engage stakeholders, involve key staff to gain insight into operational factors affecting your budget. Discuss whether budgeted resources align with current needs, such as staffing levels or equipment maintenance. Identify trends and patterns. Look for reoccurring issues, such as consistent overspending in certain categories or seasonal revenue. Use historical data to identify trends that may require long-term budget adjustments. And then I need you to adjust the budgets as needed. Update the budget to reflect new realities, such as increased costs, changes in revenue, strategic priorities. Reallocate funds to address shortfalls or capitalize on opportunities. Again, when we're looking at our budget, let's monitor compliance and goals. Let's ensure that the budget aligns with regulatory requirements, tax obligations, licensing fees. Evaluate whether that budget supports practice goals, such as expanding services, hiring staff, improving patient satisfaction. And then I want you to document your findings and plan for future reviews. Record insights from the evaluation, including causes of variance and corrective actions taken. Schedule regular budget reviews to maintain ongoing oversight. So right now, I use 2 companies for this process with my own needs. I utilize my CPA, and I utilize a company called Econologics. Both companies help me as an owner budget in my practice, my day-to-day, my cash flow, and all the different variables that I need to understand to be successful in my budget, my planning, my growth strategy. So I think it's so crucial that you look at those things, because having your CPA and having your financial planning group correlate, not just for your practice's growth, but your ownership growth, is really critical. I saw changes within 6 months by implementing those 2 resources. So I think it's really important that you look at all those things so that you're evaluating the way that your budget can help contribute to your growth trajectory. Now, it's important that we recalibrate our budget. So when we're recalibrating a budget, it's essential when a private practice faces financial discrepancies, changing market conditions, strategic shifts. Hey, I lost a couple employees, whatever, that we have some effective strategies. So I've got 3 for you to look at. The first is I want you to conduct a comprehensive variance analysis and adjust allocations accordingly. You're going to compare your actual revenue and expenses to budget amounts for that period. I like quarterly, you may like monthly. Identify the significant variances, what is lower, what is more, etc. Determine root cause, reduced client volume, unexpected repairs, ineffective marketing, loss of people, whatever that may be. I want you to reallocate the funds to address shortfalls, capitalizing on opportunity. So an example could be reduced discretionary spending. Maybe non-essential training is paused to cover increased utility costs. Update revenue forecasts based on current trends, adjusting expense budgets accordingly so that you see that shift. An example is a dental practice notices a 10% revenue shortfall due to fewer patient visits last quarter. It reduces its marketing expenses by 15% and reallocates the funds to cover fixed costs like rent while planning a targeted patient retention campaign. So I want to be clear, that marketing expense, you could say, well, wouldn't you want to increase it because there's less patients? Well, potentially, they actually don't need more patients. They need patients to come in, so it's a patient retention campaign. But maybe they're doing marketing expenses that are not creating the same ROI. So maybe that's an advertisement in a magazine that doesn't net them the best results. So they're repurposing that marketing expense, I want to say. The benefits is that we're ensuring budget reflects current financial realities and it prioritizes essential expenses while still investing in the future growth of your organization. The next thing I want you to do is I want you to reassess your revenue forecast, your cost structures. We need to review historical data, current market conditions to update revenue forecasts. So account for changes in client demand. Right now, one of the things that I'm seeing is telehealth funding's changing. We need to incorporate that telehealth might not be able to be the same forecast as it was last year. We need to look at a reduction in those revenue streams. We need to evaluate fixed and variable costs so that we can recalibrate that and that we have more accurate revenue forecasts with those changes. So the same can go the other way. I just hired 5 new therapists that I didn't expect. Well, now my forecast of revenue can shift, as an example. I just had 3 employees announce maternity leave. I got to readjust my budget and my expectation, as an example. So a physical therapy practice revises its revenue forecast for second location downward due to a slower than expected patient acquisition rate. Maybe it negotiates a lower lease rate for the office space, allocating savings to online advertising to attract new clients. Sometimes what we'll do is we'll do a pass-through. So we'll say, hey, can we renegotiate my lease? I need a 10% reduction of my lease now, but I'll let you increase 13% in 2 years or whatever that may be. I'll pay it forward in other ways. So looking at aligning your budget with realistic revenue expectations, optimizing resource allocation and ROI. Now, don't just say, hey, I'll give you 10% later to save 5% now. It's got to still financially pencil, but looking at that is really crucial. 3, we want to engage our stakeholders. We want to implement rolling budgets. So involve your office managers, your accountants, your department leads, your CPAs to gather insights on operational needs, cost savings opportunities. We want to shift from a static annual budget to a rolling budget with regularly reflection of new data. We want to use feedback to prioritize our spending. We want to communicate budget changes to our staff. A therapy practice holds a meeting with clinicians and administrative staff to identify inefficiencies, as an example. Based on that feedback, it adopts a rolling budget, reducing overtime hours. It increases funds for different software to meet growing demand. The benefit is we're enhancing flexibility and we're making our budget remain relevant. So, how to optimize an ongoing budget year over year? We need to benchmark our expenses against industry standards. Annually compare your practice's expenses to industry benchmarks. Implement predictive analytics. Using those predictive analytics, we can measure client demand, market trends, reimbursement rates, adjusting revenue forecasts, and resource allocation proactively so that you're avoiding financial surprises. We need to create in our budget a flexible innovation fund. Allocate a small percentage of the budget to reserve funds for innovation, creating new technology, launching new services, enhancing patient experience. These are all part of that innovation fund. The next thing is we need to conduct regular process audits. We need to see what's working, what's not working. What are the operational processes that work and how do we eliminate waste, streamlining workflow? Sometimes we can invest in a software that can actually reduce our overhead. Incentivizing staff cost savings. What if I told every employee that for every $10,000 of savings through one of their ideas, I'll give them a $1,000 bonus? Would it be worth it? Yeah, still $9,000 difference. Incentivize cost savings ideas. So in 2025, the Medical Economics Physician Report projects that practices with a robust budget planning can improve cash flow by 18%, which is ultimately critical for financial stability. As Dave Ramsey says, a budget is telling your money where to go instead of wondering where it went. I love that so much. So thank you for tuning into this episode. Don't forget to like us, subscribe, and together we can thrive, not just survive. Thank you for tuning in to the Private Practice Survival Guide podcast. I'm incredibly grateful to each and every one of you. Exciting news. We're now available everywhere, from Spotify to Apple Podcasts to YouTube or anywhere you like to listen to your podcasts. So watch, listen, and reach out. If you love this episode, please drop a 5-star review. It truly means the world to me. Are you looking for more ways to elevate your practice? If so, now is your chance. Reach out, go to my website, or email me at brandon@wellnessworksmp.com. And remember, it's not just about surviving, it's about thriving.